All right, good evening, everyone. We are in Unit 5, Cognitive Psychology. This is Module 39, the Dynamics of Intelligence. And it is a wonderful Thursday evening. I'm here with my cat, Hope. She is joining us, hoping to learn a few things, see if she's got some crystallized intelligence. We're going to talk about what the difference is between crystallized and fluid, cross-sectional studies and longitudinal studies. We're going to look at intelligence over the lifespan and also talk about some of the extremes, low and high extremes intelligence. So if you recall, in Module 38, we talked about the different types of intelligence tests, and we talked about how we have Wessler created the adult intelligence scale, the adult IQ tests. And he noticed it in his research that he felt there was a decline in mental ability with age as the whole part of the aging process. And it was kind of giving a dismal view. People were very concerned, weren't necessarily always seeing the results he was talking about. And it went unchallenged, though. At some point, they started to do other studies. So they did something called a longitudinal study, and we'll talk a little bit more detail about that. But it's when you take a group of people and a cohort, the same cohort, and you retest them years later. And they noticed when they did the longitudinal study that the intelligence remained relatively stable. All right, so what is the two types? We have crystallized intelligence, which is our accumulated knowledge and verbal skills, and it does tend to increase with age. And what that means is you can learn new things. You can teach old dog new tricks. So you absolutely have the ability to learn new things. For example, like knowing the battles of World War II. That's the type of intelligence that you need, is crystallized to be able to know that. All right. Then fluid intelligence is your ability to reason speedily and abstractly, and it does tend to decrease with age, especially during late adulthood. So that is where you're just able to work through like a logic type puzzle, math problems, abstract, inductive reasoning type things, but you have to do it quickly. The processing speed definitely tends late adulthood. And when we're talking late adulthood, we would say over age 75 that it might start to decline, or does decline. So let's look at this example. Which of the following best represents crystallized intelligence? And ironically enough, my husband is actually out doing this particular thing right at this very moment. And it's not writing creative computer programs. It is working on crossword puzzles. So that is an example of crystallized intelligence because you are gaining new knowledge. And he has actually gotten really good at crossword puzzles. It's impressive. So let's look at the different types of research, and we're going to be talking about this in another unit, human development. So cross-sectional research, and think you're taking cross sections, and a cross section is like you're taking a group of 20-year-olds, a group of 30-year-olds, a group of 40-year-olds, a group of 50-year-olds, or whatever, and you're taking this different cross section, you bring them together, have them do similar type intelligence testing and testing their mental abilities. And they noticed that in these studies that there was a mental ability decline. And it was with inductive reasoning that they noticed that it was declining. Right. So in the longitudinal study, they took the same group of people and studied them at different points of their life. Remember, it was cohort. So in 1950, then in 1985, and then present. And they found that their intelligence remained stable. And in some tests, it was actually increasing. Could have been a little familiar with the testing, but there was a rise. So you can see that in the study here. All right. So what are some of the things we have to think about? Like, why do they have such different results? Well, one thing with the cross sections is that the cross sections could have other variables. So let's look at them. When comparing 70-year-olds and 30-year-olds, it's comparing different people from different eras. Like think of lots of different things that might have been happening during the time they grew up. So generally less educated people born in early 1900s with better educated after 1950. So that certainly could play a difference. People raised in large families with people raised in small families, different eras, different, there's smaller families today. People from less affluent families with people from more affluent families. So average income and maybe life, the general, how we're living our lives has improved. So many variables are present in the same sample population that could have actually impacted the results. With the longitudinal study, we also have to take things into consideration that participants who survive at the end of, so like remember how they were studied over different time periods of their life, the same group of people, that we definitely know that if you are making it all the way to 85, right, that there's a lot of some level of healthiness there. But it might have ended and the people they're ending up testing at the end were already at the higher intelligence scale. So it said when researchers adjust for loss of participants, they found an intelligence decline, especially after age 85. So some of that, even the crystallized, might be affected. So many variables could impact the presence of some members of the sample population at various points in the research. All right, so let's just make sure you understand what an example of a longitudinal study is. So just look over that for a moment. It's kind of a wordy question. So yeah, so E is the answer. It's a group of kindergartners is given an intelligence test and are retested every 30 years or every other year for 30 years. So you can see that that would be longitudinal. All right, so what do we just generally want to have as our conclusions? That aging adults lose recall, memory, and processing speed. Yes, that's the fluid part. And the crystallized part, that you can actually still gain knowledge, you can learn new things, you are wise, gain vocabulary. So, but we also have to understand that just because maybe the fluid you're not processing or able to work through problem solving as quickly, that there are social reasoning skills increase. You can take multiple perspectives. There's an appreciation for your knowledge limits. You tend to be more wise in times of conflict, and there's less negative emotions in your dealing with life and experiences. All right, so if you look here, here's another graph. Sometimes they're going to have you look at graphs on the AP exam, and you want to be able to quickly interpret them, and you can quickly see that vocabulary knowledge, that it is increasing and or it's leveling off. But there is the decline that you're seeing in the reasoning, spatial visualization, memory, and processing speed. All right, so it might help you to think about how crystals grow larger over time, as does your knowledge. And then fluid, I think of fluid like going really fast. So that remembers that one has to do with the processing speed. All right, so here's a couple other things. When we talk about, one of the themes in psychology is stability versus change. So how much is certain things staying the same, which would be stability, or is it changing? And they're finding that with intelligence, that once they start doing testing after age 4, it starts to become more stable. So meaning like they can have some predictability of how someone's going to perform on an intelligence test later on. By 11, it's pretty consistent. And they did some studies to show this. So on June 1st, 1932, essentially every child in the country born in 1921, wow, at age 11 took an intelligence test in Scotland. And they purposely did it to identify working class children who would benefit from further education. But it was pretty remarkable what they found. So pretty consistently, the scores that they were receiving at 11, they were receiving when they were older at 80. So it says the intelligence test administered to 11-year-olds, was readministered to 542 survivors, and the correlation between the two sets of scores after nearly 70 years of varied life experiences was striking. So just meaning that it was consistent. It was stable. It kind of stayed the same. It didn't change. So what did he most likely score as an adult? So it would be the one that's kind of close. He scored an 89 on intelligence test. So he's probably going to be around the same. So probably like 92, right? All right. So they also found that with women, or that there might be a correlation with that the ones that scored the highest on the intelligence test at 11 tend to live longer, a little bit longer, tend. Obviously, there's many other variables to longevity of life, many other things, but that they did tend to live a little bit longer, the highest percentage. So when we talk about what is an intellectual disability, that means anything that is going to be below the average of 100 that's in this 0.1%, which is, below 70 on an IQ, like of an IQ that is below 70. And they're going to have difficulty adapting to the demands of life. All right, so low intellectual functioning is shown on the test performance that is the lowest 3% of the general population, or about 70 or below. And as expressed in 3 areas: conceptual, social, and practical skills. So somebody that has Down syndrome would be in that range. And a condition of mild to severe intellectual disability associated with physical disorders. And it is actually a chromosome, extra copy of of 21, the chromosome 21. So here, they might have, sometimes there are special schools, but here in Chile, they actually have a boy that is sharing the classrooms, and they call it integrating. And yeah, that's pretty special. All right, so we also have the other extreme. So this was the low extreme, with intellectual learning disabilities and extremes on, learning limitations. But the other side of it is the giftedness. And these are children with evidence of high achievement in intellectual, creative, artistic, and leadership capacity, or in specific fields. But they might need services themselves because the public school system and those are not necessarily providing what they need. And I can actually give you a quick example that my next door neighbor, their daughter was, she ended up being homeschooled after 4th grade because she was so advanced, and her IQ was, I think she was like a 140, 150 or something. And yeah, she was sophomore in college by 16. So that's any indication. So here is another example of that. Moshe Kai Kavalin completed his 3rd college degree by the time he was 14. When the math major graduated from UCLA, according to his mother, he first picked up a college textbook and started reading at age 2. Wow, that's impressive. So, it does become a little controversial when it comes to, when you separate people at different points of their education. So other studies have followed the lives of precocious youths who have aced the math SAT at age 13 by scoring in the top 1% of their age group. By their 50s, there's these 1650 math whizzes had secured 680 patents. So, that is definitely leaning and talking about like income or potential success with those top 1%. So it says about 1% of Americans earn doctorates, but for 12 and 13-year-olds who scored in the top one in the 10,000 among those of the age taking the SAT, about 4% had done so. Interesting. So some of the criticisms is when you separate, that's what I was actually going to talk about, that when you segregate people into special classes, that they, in some cases, they feel that they're not, that they are receiving more resources and better resources in receiving their education than people that are in the mainstream regular classes. So critics note that separating learners by aptitude sometimes creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The other thing is too, right? If you ever remember, if you were in the GT program, there was that point where you're like, yes, I am in the GT program. And then if there was any testing, because you remember there's usually testing around, I think it's what, third or fourth grade. And then if you were not in the GT program, and all of a sudden, like here you have your best friend, you're sitting next to them in class, and they're like, okay, well, they're going to be going to the GT classes. And there's that part where you start feeling, maybe I guess I'm the ungifted. And I remember there's actually an experience with my kids that they were pretty average, and which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But they, where a lot of their friends were in the GT program, and they were actually scoring above average on a lot of the tests. But because most of their friends were in the GT, which is, the higher percentage, that they were feeling that they were below average. My kids were feeling that way because they were comparing themselves with the real high achieving GT top, 5% students. So, all right. And that is it for today. Have a wonderful evening.